Welcome to Sailing into Oblivion. I'm not Jerome Rand. I'm Jason Nellis. I'm the host of Building Value with Jason Nellis, and you may have heard me on Jerome's podcast in the past. Well, today we've got a special treat for you. He and I produced a podcast both for his channel and for mine. Hopefully you'll enjoy. We had a nice long conversation about how his work has evolved over the last few years, some of the public speaking that he now does, some of the work I've done in social media and content creation, basically anything and everything related to all the different subjects that he and I cover in common. Jerome is one of my favorite people in the entire world. And if you've been a fan of his podcast for a while, like I have, you know that he's also one of the nicest people in the world. So let me just say, as an opportunity to participate on his podcast, this is pretty cool. I'm kind of a fan. As always, let me take a moment to remind you to follow him, follow me, subscribe, review, like, follow, do all the things. The more the merrier. It really does help us both out. But enough about me. Let's jump into it. Ladies and gentlemen, here we are with the sailing sailor man himself, Jerome Rand. Jerome, good to see you, buddy.
Well, thank you, Jason. Two podcasts come together. So I should say, Jason, it is great to have you back on the show once again.
You know, it's nice to be back on each other's shows.
Yes.
This is becoming something of a bromance. I dig it. I'm a fan.
I'm really enjoying it. And, it's fun because there's always about a month in between us reuniting and you put some shows out and I put some shows out and I'm just loving them. And that was what sort of spawned me to reach out to you this time, is because the guests that you have are really starting to fill you with some top information when it comes to building a platform, building a social media empire, if you will. Because, the guy who did the iPhone stuff, he's got a huge channel. Huge. Millions, right?
Yeah. That's Michael Fisher, the Mr. Mobile, for those of you who want to go check him out. He's top notch. He and I have been buddies for coming up on a decade, and he's a good dude. And not only that, he's incredibly sharp. So whenever I get a chance to interview him, whether it's for my stuff or some of the other platforms I've worked on in the past, it's always rife with just awesome information and a really strong perspective, which you don't always see in some folks. So I've always appreciated that. I appreciate you listening. I'm glad it resonated for you.
Oh, it absolutely did. And besides how distracted I was by the beautiful sets of hair that you two have, I'm jealous.
You're not wrong.
Holy smokes. And it did distract me a little bit because it was difficult. Because as soon as that question was posed in the beginning, I sat and pondered it for a while, and I went back and forth. And then I had to rewind and re-listen.
Sure. Yeah. You're not the only one. I get
it. So I guess, if we want to just kind of kick things right off and into this whole idea of, should we set up under the guise of, you're a person like you or me, and we want to grow a channel. We want to grow a platform.
Yeah.
How the heck do we do that?
I think it's the thing I talk about the most, right? My podcast is really about helping to educate creators, particularly earlier in their journey, around, you've got this idea, you've got this concept, how do you bring it to life, and bringing a lot of different folks into that ecosystem. With you and I, we've had these conversations at length, but I think one of the things that I really love about what you've done, and I'll use this as an example, is you've been super consistent about your content, about the things you talk about, and about the fact that you're always putting content out. It's a hustle, right? It is that hustle. I think in a lot of ways, thinking first at the beginning, if I was going to start over again from scratch, the first thing I'd be thinking about isn't what's the stuff I want to talk about. I think the first thing I'd be thinking about is who do I want to speak to? Who is an audience to whom I really want to have an impact? Which I think is actually more important than what I have to say and who I want to say it, to. That was mostly English. Sorry, it's a little later where I am here. But okay. I think a lot of it has to do with the idea that you're going to build anything, you have to start with a solid foundation, and knowing to whom it's going to be valuable and applicable is the most important thing. So for yours, you're speaking to other sailors, you're talking to people who are interested in all things nautical. You're thinking to really even to broaden it out to people who just have that spirit of adventure, even if it's, more fantastic than not. Do you think I've sort of nailed your audience? Does that feel like the right folks that you're speaking to?
I think so. I've slowly been trying to open myself up a little bit more into not just the adventure stories and other people's adventure stories, but just my story in general as I try and punch my way through life, if you will. And I've recently found that people are pretty receptive to that. They email and they're like, "Hey, it's nice to see and hear about the struggles and how you're getting through those and all that sort of stuff." I wouldn't want to say I ever want to be a total like motivational genre type channel. But I like the tidbits. I like, if I find something that works for me, I want to share it with my audience.
Well, and I've noticed too, since we spoke the first time, I think it was by the time this launches, probably a couple months ago, when we reconnected, you and I had a long conversation about this virtual setup in the studio and the way that that's made things easier for me. It's very clear you've taken that and you've launched a whole new thing with that. A lot of your podcasts are on video. I see them doing well on YouTube. We were talking before, you're getting good engagement. The view time is deep, and that's hugely valuable in terms of both monetization as well as just broadly acquiring new audience members. Talk me through sort of how that's been working for you and what you've discovered.
Well, it's been eye-opening because I always shied away from this due to the fact that I just couldn't produce the audio quality that I was looking for. And I didn't really consider the whole idea of throwing these things on YouTube, especially in the beginning back, 3 years ago when I started the podcast. And so from that point, though, with the help of yours truly, I was able to up the game to the point where it didn't sound like I was under a professional mic and my guest was on a cell phone somewhere. And all of a sudden it's like, holy cow. And then you have that dynamic of the video quality as well. And, yes, it is something that I have to pay for. I have to make an investment to be able to utilize this platform, but the results are amazing. And then if you can get the views and the interaction with the audience, then all of a sudden, because it's monetized, you can actually make back or make profit on what you're actually doing. And so it's been huge, but it didn't all happen in one shot. I mean, I don't know how many video podcasts I've done now, but we're easily closing in on 10 or more, I think.
And remind me again, how long have you been doing the podcast in terms of years of investment?
I think the first show dropped in October of 2020 after I returned from 88 days out in the Atlantic Ocean.
So I was going to do the months, but 3.5 years. You had a following before. Clearly this is a new direction. We were talking a little bit about before, I'd love for you to touch on sort of what are the real world investments you're making beyond platforms, right? Because you're investing in Riverside. That's $15-20 a month. You've upped your mic game. What other things do you have working for you, broadly speaking, to help sort of put this engine together?
Well, I think, the real key is beyond just the social media stuff, which for all intents and purposes, unless you are pumping money in for the advertising, so that it's showing stuff like boosting posts and stuff. I've never had to do that.
Yeah, which doesn't always work anyway.
I've always, I don't know. I'm going to leave that one alone, but I've never done it. I think having a personal website is a must-have, especially with the speaking stuff and everything else that I do. So there's the website, then you've got the actual platform, because Zoom just doesn't cut it. You really need something that's going to give you the quality. I mean, sorry to the folks at Zoom. Zoom's great for a quick chat, quick meeting, nice and free.
Zoom's not sponsoring anything, man. Don't worry about it. It's okay.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
The platform, and then the podcast. I use Podbean, and I think it's $9 or $10 a month. And, I suppose you could throw Patreon in there because they're taking what do they take? 8% or something like
9,
that.
I think. Yeah.
9. Oh, they've upped their game.
They have.
But you don't have to pay for it. So, those are really the virtual things that I'm having to sort of pay for. And then, like you said, the hardware really is the camera and the quality recorder, the microphones. And, I was lucky. I found that you suggested that ring light, and I was able to find an inexpensive one, but, I'm still blotchy and red, but I've always been that way. My skin's Irish, baby, Irish.
Yeah, but you're a sailor, man. You got to take care of that. I mean, you're putting yourself out there.
I think, honestly, no, I just get so excited, and I put sunscreen on already today, which reddens my skin. But hey, I've been living with it for 45 years, and I'm used to it. It's all good.
But it's never too late to dive into the well that is makeup and beauty TikTok. And I will say there's a lot of really good advice for men as well as for women. Just saying, if you're looking to clear up your skin tone, dude, it's not the worst thing in the world. Give in. It's okay. Why not?
Wow.
I'm clearly not doing it myself. That's not happening here. But if you're concerned about it, that's my suggestion.
No. One of the absolute perks about being an adventurer is the more weathered you look, the more authentic you really are projecting yourself to be. So wrinkles, bring them on. That's just going to be higher speaking fees as far as I'm concerned.
I like it. I'm putting that on a t-shirt. Yeah, seriously. I dig it. What about, so you talked about the speaking engagements you've been doing. How's that been? Has that been progressing for you?
Yes, it definitely has. After the big events this past March in the Caribbean, which were technically the first big corporate sort of conference style engagements, pretty much as far as the speaking agency that got me to that spot, as far as they're considered, I knocked it out of the park, which was the biggest weight lifted off my shoulders. I've never been as nervous about getting on stage as I was down there. And the rooms were big. I mean, 300, 400 people, but there's huge screens and there's a clock that's staring you down and it's ticking down, and you really got to end everything right at zero. And it was just next level. But, I put the work in, and thankfully it all paid off and I didn't screw it up. I do every once in a while have those nightmares of where, I get up on stage and then the video's gone and I forgot my computer or something. And I wake up flustered in a panic. The heart is just like, whoa, God. So, didn't do that, thankfully. And then ended up getting signed by the speaking agency for a year-long contract. We're sort of reworking the presentation as we speak. And I still have other bookings that I need to fulfill outside of that. But it's sort of the key to me being able to focus on the stage presence and doing what I do best, and sort of let them do what they do best, which is find the bookings, negotiate the fees, and get everything sorted so that I can just get out there and do it, which is a huge relief. Oh, I can hear the sirens of old Paris.
Okay, so I'm not in Paris, but it's the same. Yeah, that's funny. I didn't know that was coming through. We'll swing back to my stuff in a second, but I want to follow along with this though for a second. So you have representation now. It's been going well.
Yep.
I would argue that's a really important step to really, focus on for a second, because you're really talking about the really, I don't even know what to call it, the next scaling phase of what you're working on, right? Which is to say that you're kind of starting to move towards the big times. Right? Like this is, when you have representation and somebody's getting you gigs and you're sharing the revenue on that, and now you've got one less thing on your plate that lets you scale. That's huge. I mean, that's not minor leagues at all.
No, for sure. It was sort of the culmination of literally the last 6 years, essentially, since I got back from that voyage around the world. The push has always been to get there, and having to sort of grind it out and do presentations at schools and yacht clubs and places. The first little speaking tour that I set up, I had no idea what I was doing, and I literally lost money on a few of the gigs because I just didn't know what to charge. I didn't consider the travel costs, and like I remember walking out of one being like, holy cow, that just cost me like $50 to do that. Oof. And I'm like, oh, that was supposed to be, and they paid me. I just, I didn't consider the travel. But you have to do those things. You have to go and just bust it through there and make all the mistakes just like learning how to sail. And then as long as you're able to keep the persistence up and you keep going and you don't give up, where I definitely got very close a few times to being like, you know what? I'm done with this. I'm going to go get a regular job and we'll just call it a day. I had my shot. But
yeah,
thankfully that never came to fruition. And yeah, so now we're at this point, and yeah, we're going to see how things go into the fall and stuff. But there might be one small hiccup. I do get those itchy feet, and that sense of adventure starts to boil up inside of me. So
yeah, man. I get that.
We can talk about the possibilities, towards the end of what goes on this winter. But as far as the speaking stuff goes, it's been an amazingly difficult ride, but it does seem like we are at the top of the Ferris wheel right now, and the view is nice. And I'm just hoping it'll just pause up there for a couple of years and let me enjoy, if you know what I mean.
Totally. I mean, kudos to you. That's not,
thank you.
That's not an insignificant step. And most importantly, I think it's a sign of strength when you recognize a weakness, right? You talk about, the first time you did it, you didn't have enough, wherewithal to know how much you were going to end up spending. You lost money on it. Reminds me of the scene in the Blues Brothers when they go to perform, and the guy comes out and goes, "Well, you were getting paid $200, and your boys drank $300 worth of beer," and they were like, "Well, after the first round, we didn't get charged. We just assumed it was free." And the guy goes, "No, all right, well, we'll go get the checkbook." I love that for you. But you're still doing the rest of your work yourself right now, right? In terms of like, you're doing your recording, you're doing your editing, you're doing your thumbnails, you're doing your titles. Are you finding those to be challenges you're comfortable with? Are those things you're looking to eventually offload to somebody else? Like, where are you with all that?
Well, so yeah, I mean, what I'm hoping is to kind of keep growing the knowledge base. And, it seems like each time that you and I get together, I get a takeaway that I go then and I start working on it. So, the first thing was the virtual podcast and getting the audio and everything right. And that took a few tries, but we got there. So now I can sort of shelf that and now move on to makeup, obviously, next. After that, we'll see where we go. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's sort of the thing that I'm trying to figure out is what are those super important things that really take priority when you are trying to develop that growth. And I guess it should be noted probably that we're under the assumption that the goal of growing any platform is not only to monetize and make money, but also to enjoy doing it, I suppose. Not treat it like I'm digging ditches, which I've done that for years, and it has its benefits. It's, your arms get pretty big and all that, but
I have very fragile hands. I don't think I'd be right for it. It's not really
get
my
that
thing.
Man some gloves. But yeah, so the goal, is to monetize, but also to enjoy what we're doing. And yeah, I mean, that's always going to be a big question: is where do you think the priorities lie? And it can be something as specific as like thumbnails and titles, or maybe it's more about content and clickbait and all that sort of stuff.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think you have to be careful, as we've talked about. You don't want to. There's a difference between clickbait for the sake of being competitive with other people in terms of your title and your thumbnail. It's another when you're throwing, trash out there. I really always appreciated and admired that your North Star is I'm sharing something of myself, and that has to be authentic, right? Like, none of this is, I've seen loads of channels now across multiple platforms where it's clearly somebody who's just like, they're using some, platform to spit out thousands of pieces of content, and it's all AI generated, and they don't care that it's incredibly low quality. They're just trying to get their numbers up so that they can monetize and turn it into a thing. And, that is an easy path. It is an automated path, but it is not a valuable path. It is not one that provides meaning for other people, which is what you've sort of always put out there. It's what I'm trying to do too. It's a harder and lonelier road, but at least you provide for me, let me just say, a light to follow. Okay. If I do this long enough, if I put in the work long enough, people will respond, and there might be something valuable for me to start to, do something with.
Well, and do you think that those sort of approaches where it's like AI generated and it's just flood the system, get the numbers. Do you think that's sustainable at all, or are we just going to hit like a high water mark here soon, where literally the unique and authentic become these treasured little things that everybody's trying to find, and those get all the attention?
No, I think it's a subset of people who are looking to make money. I don't see it as being a major threat in the long term. It's there, it's not going away, but it's not. It's a plurality at best. In the early days of Instagram and Tumblr, and some of the very early days of social media platforms going from being a big way to stay in touch with friends and family and starting to become something that you could monetize. I'm reminded of the aggregate accounts that used to exist. I don't want to say the name here, but the, F Jerry, fill in the F with your favorite 4-letter word.
Yeah, I remember that.
Whose whole thing was, I don't actually create content. I just steal other people's content and throw it out into the world. And only until they were called out on it 99,000 times did they even start attributing it to other people, let alone sharing in the revenue. Was that everybody? Of course not. Was it a couple of really smart people who had an idea and they knew they could take advantage of it before they got called on it? Sure. I think we're in the same space. I think there's a number of low quality content producers who are just looking for eyeballs, but I don't think they're ever going to become the bigger threat. What I am interested in, and I should preface by saying, the company I'm about to mention, I am a very, very tiny minority investor in, but I think that they're the example of a company that I would say is doing this well. There's a company I'm a little bit of a part of called Magic Hour AI, and they basically let you take content and do a lot of AI effects with them. So you can take a basketball clip that you've produced and turn it into characters from Star Wars, or if you're doing a talking head interview and you want it to be Superman and the Flash, you can do that back and forth kind of a thing. And the idea is that they've simplified it, and their AI engine lets you do it in such a way is that what you're really doing is taking your own content and re-rendering it with AI. So it's not I want a video of Jerome flipping over a Hobie. But instead, if you had that video and you wanted to turn it into some sort of AI generated anime, right? That's what they do. I think it's going to be a lot more of that we're going to see as sort of flooding the network. More remixes of, somebody does something original and 50 people put it through AI filters. I think that's what's coming more frequently. I don't think that's bad. I think it's going to end up being a platform for expression that early on, everybody's just going to try the same thing until one person comes up with something unique, and that's going to open the floodgates. But for a while, it's going to kind of look a little bit ubiquitous in that way, I think.
Right. Well, and we would see those a lot on TikTok, even like 2 years ago or a year ago, where all of a sudden you'd get some app, and I can't remember what it's called, but they're the ones where the screen, you take a picture of yourself and the screen goes and then all of a sudden it's animated. And those have been around for quite some time, and all of a sudden it turns into a little theme. Everybody does it real quick, and then it sort of disappears. And I don't know. Not exactly what I would call authentic or anything like that, unless you're the first person that grabs it and goes. But I don't know. My hope is that platforms like mine and like yours, that you're trying to produce something that's a little more thoughtful, and you're investing yourself into it a little bit more, are going to stick around and go the distance.
I mean, honestly, I think that's always going to be the case. I really find that most of the people who are doing the best, most successful work are the ones that are being original, taking risks, doing things that are out of bounds for some of the stuff that other people in their space are doing. That doesn't always mean it works well. And sometimes it also turns out that those people, there's things outside of their stuff that, they do terrible things to. I don't really know where I'm going with this one. Let me roll that back for a second. You get what I'm saying? There's the person that's presented on camera, and then it turns out that they, threw a puppy over a bridge. Terrible stuff. Right. I think the point I was going for there, and I should point out I'm very tired. But I think the point I was going for there is,
great.
You're very kind. I think the boundary pushers will continue to do interesting and innovative stuff that will then, for folks who follow behind, they'll put up the scaffolding. They'll do the work of figuring out what's the actual right space here for us to build and monetize and have maybe a little bit of that creative tension, but also not so much that we can't actually find somebody who's willing to pay us for it. And I think it's a capitalistic thing. That's always going to be the progression. Somebody
Right.
will break a boundary. The people who follow behind will do the work to figure out how to make money. But that initial person, Casey Neistat comes to mind, right? The original YouTube vlogger of 12 years ago, he was just making a movie every day. And then suddenly he blew up, and then there were 20,000 people following right behind a week later who were all suddenly like, hey guys, today I'm going down to the beach. Let's go check it out. And they've all got these weird whip pan editing techniques that I still can't do.
Well, it is. It's always an interesting sort of progression.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, there's the people who have the insight and they just go for it, and they're the first ones through the gate, and then the huge flood sort of follows. And yeah, I mean, I guess you could sort of just really try and become the next person to find the newest thing. But again, it's not as though you're trying to produce something that's unique and inventive and all that. It's like you're looking for some other avenue. And yeah, I mean, we're talking about our own stuff, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to know, as you think about the opportunities you're going to get from the speaking experience and, talking to your agent about what possibilities may open up for you, does that give you pause to reassess what kinds of content you produce, right? Is it going to be less like, here I am sailing in the Caribbean and here's a great shot of us skimming the water? Is it going to be more interpersonal relationship type stuff? I mean, what's interesting to you versus what's interesting to a potential paying audience, I guess, is something you're going to have to address in the coming months.
Absolutely. And I have to admit, long ago when I first opened, an Instagram account or all that stuff, or at least got back into it, after the trip around the world, when the speaking stuff started, I did sort of always have the thought, because I didn't really, and I still don't 100% really enjoy posting a lot of stuff. And I've always had a lot of trouble with the whole, like, hey, look at me, look what I did. But I know that I have to do that. You have to do some semblance of self-promotion. Now, I always figured I would get to a point where I had uploaded enough so there was like a catalog of interesting things on, let's say, Instagram, so that if a potential speaking engagement came up, I could flick them that link and they can look through it and they can be like, okay, wow, this guy did all this. Liz, is pretty interesting. And then I could sort of be done with it. I don't think you're ever really done with it anymore. I think it's one of those things where you don't have to upload every single day by any means. But like we were saying before, there has to be a little bit of an update now and again, just to make sure everybody knows. It's almost like a wellness check. Like, oh, he's still alive. He's still putting stuff out there. But on sort of another note really quick, I thank my lucky stars that I always, since the very beginning of any of this stuff, always tried to keep my content as clean as possible. And, the swearing and the super controversial stuff and da-da-da, I always steered clear of that. And even when I look at my podcasts, like the listener notes and all that sort of stuff, or the listener score, it's marked down as clean. And I'm like, yeah, that's good. That's good.
That's important. I appreciate that. I do drop an occasional F-bomb on mine, but I think my audience will tolerate it. At least nobody's complained about it yet. Yeah. I love that. I look forward to that. I think I started this last year. I had 10 episodes. I was still sort of finding my way. Life got in the way. I got distracted. Starting this up again this year has opened up a whole new set of invitations and opportunities, and I'm just excited to see where it goes. So again, as I said earlier, like your progression is my North Star, not necessarily the part about the sailing. That's not really my thing. I've tried.
We've
really
gone
tried.
over. Yeah,
we have. It's that poor ensign will never recover, that poor boat. But I do think that when I look at how much work you've put in and I see sort of the direction that you've taken, it gives me inspiration. So, I just want to say it, for the listeners out there, I really admire what you've done, and I hope to achieve it one day myself.
Well, Jason, I honestly, after listening to and watching and seeing how well you produce your podcast, It's only a matter of time before it goes and just, which is great. It's exactly what I want, because then I can ride your curtails, buddy. It's gonna be awesome. But
no, twin engines, buddy. Twin engines. It's not one dragging the other. It's the two working together.
There we go.
Yeah.
Well, I guess to pose one question to you. So if you were to start everything all over again, how would you make the choice between what I've always thought of as sort of the big three, either doing YouTube, doing a podcast, or just focusing on like social media, i.e. Instagram, TikTok, that sort of thing?
If it's purely a monetization play, I think YouTube is by far your best bet for starting to build something there. I mean, you can do it with Instagram. There's a lot more noise on every platform than there was 2 years ago, let alone 5 or 10 years ago. So you are always going to be battling that. But if I were going to start over again and I was, let's take it a step further. Let's say I'm 25. I've got a particular point of view. We talked earlier about like I have a clear sense of who I want to speak to. Mm-hmm. I love YouTube. I do. I'm a video guy. I've been a TV fan my whole life. I've been a movie fan my whole life. I love seeing visual video content. Part of what I love about the podcast format is that, I kind of get to have my cake and eat it too by producing a video podcast and then later putting out the audio version of it. And, I get to see how those sometimes videos do better than they do on podcast and vice versa. And that teaches me a lot of stuff. So I guess my thing would be try and find what speaks to you the most. If I had to pick one, I'd say YouTube, because it gives you a lot more flexibility in that way. And it is the only platform that does revenue sharing. You don't get that with Instagram or some of the other short form content. You definitely don't get that with a podcast. You're really starting from the ground up there in terms of building something sustainable. But it's also, I mean, as we talked about, like in order to be competitive, you have to have an investment, right? Like you have to have a webcam, maybe even one like mine that's got a crispier lens and a crispier, body. You got to get the good mic. Like it does take something of a financial investment too, which you have to be conscientious of if you want to be competitive. On the other hand, there's a lot of people out there who've got their phone and they use their phone to incredible success and they've built followings way larger than mine. So,
huge.
I mean, I think it really just depends on what it is you want to put out there and what you're willing to invest in when the timing is right. So,
well, that's interesting because, I mean, when I think about it now, YouTube, literally, if you've got your phone and you've got some interesting content that you want to start pumping out there, you can essentially do it for free. You don't really need, if you've got, a laptop or whatever, or you don't even need a laptop. All you need is your phone, really, because you can upload right with it.
I was just speaking, one of the episodes I produced, I guess by the time this airs, a couple weeks ago, was with Lauren DeGiorgi, who is, you can look him up on TikTok. He's got a phenomenal following across multiple short form platforms. And his whole thing is that he is a piano tuner and a piano player. And he does a bunch of silly comic content with music. And he edits all of it on a little app on his phone. And
I haven't watched that one. Oh, wow.
You should.
Yeah.
How dare you?
Sorry.
But what I think, no, it's fine. But what I think you'll appreciate about that one is that what he really talks about is exactly what we've been talking about. He gets up in the morning, he sits down with a notepad, he has a cup of coffee, he puts on some music, and then he just starts ideating. And he's writing on a physical piece of paper all the things that he has thoughts about for his content and for the stuff that he wants to produce.
Right.
And then he goes and he films it on his phone, and then he edits it on a little 99-cent app on his phone, and then he produces it and boom, it's out into the world. And he's got something like 500,000 followers on Instagram, a couple 100,000 on TikTok, I think 55,000 on YouTube. It's not, it's not that it's not difficult, but it doesn't have to be, as you pointed out, it doesn't have to be this setup. It does not have to be this fancy a camera.
Exactly. Well, and I think that's sort of the point that I'm looking at is, if you're starting right off, and yes, again, the goal is to sort of get to monetization and get there, as fast as you can, I suppose, then yes, YouTube, because with the podcast, to really be able to have the audio quality and have all that, you're definitely going to have to invest, and you're going to have to actively work to either get Patreon subscribers to support you, or have the kind of content where, you've got people sniffing to do their ads and all that sort of stuff, sponsors right away.
Well, and I think too, there's probably good reason to invest in good audio equipment across the board, not just for your content creation. But I find that this really helps make sure that I'm well received on business calls, right? I mean, it's a little silly when you're on a work call, but like the reality is I come through more crisply. Nobody complains about, there's hissing in your background kind of stuff. Like it's just really easy to communicate.
You can dominate the meeting.
Oh, every time. But yeah, I mean, like people will be, I mean, so one of the things that I always appreciated learning at Hulu in its early days was, we had sometimes videos that would be delivered where the video itself, the quality was a little bit not great, but as long as the audio was still sharp and high quality, viewers were much more forgiving of it. But the moment that you delivered crappy audio, didn't matter how good the video was, they're tuning out, they're moving on. So
couldn't agree more. Yeah.
I mean, there's your content lesson for the day right there. Audio trumps video every time.
I can remember, turning on podcasts, and if it was an interview, because I used to listen to a lot of the adventure sailing ones and all that sort of stuff. And unfortunately, it was back in the day, and the guest would be on a cell phone, and I wouldn't even. I was like, I don't want to listen to a cell phone call. That's pretty awful. So definitely
I'll be honest. I have trouble with guests that I have on the show who use just their AirPods. The quality is really hard to solve for in post-production because you get a bad echo, you get kind of a muted sound. It sounds muddy. And unless you're going to really spend the time, in a digital audio workplace, that's not it. DAW, I can't think of what it actually stands for. But if you're going to go into Pro Tools and really edit the hell out of their audio to try to make it sound good, that's, you're talking about a 3 to 5 hour investment for a 1 hour interview. It's not worth the effort.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because then, you're spending huge amounts of time just to try and make it so that it's
right. Listenable.
Yeah. Thank you. That's the word. It's early here. No, actually, it's 2:30 in the afternoon. I have no excuse.
Well, so we keep talking about the time difference. Let's just put it out there. So I'm in France. I don't know if that matters to anybody. They're a little far apart.
A little bit.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, though. I recently did the last podcast I did with someone in Australia, and the one before that, Papua New Guinea. That one we had a little trouble. That one dropped out after like 20 minutes, and then we kept talking, but it stopped recording. I didn't realize that, but we're going to try that one again, at the next spot. So it happens. It happens.
Kudos to you. Well, no, you were being very generous about my lighting, and I've literally got I'm in an Airbnb. I found a light that I've been able to turn to come over here, and I'm like, I see the shine here. The shadows are all wrong. My brain can't help but get stuck on all the stuff that doesn't make sense. Not to mention I lugged a stupidly expensive camera 6,000 miles just so that I could do podcasting with you. What is wrong with me?
You're just honestly very passionate, and that's what is needed. That's a huge part of it. If you're not into the content, and I think that's a great segue into what I want to talk about next is, what are some of the top tip priorities that you need to make sure you are ready to commit to once you've launched said podcast, said YouTube channel. Just from sort of some of my notes, I know that patience is an absolute key, because nothing is going to happen absolutely immediately. And that's sometimes very frustrating to deal with.
It definitely won't happen immediately. You're absolutely right. The two qualities, one is patience. You're spot on there. The other is consistency. I mean, when I started this back up, when I was talking to a couple of different people, I'm lucky to know the person who was until recently running all of communications for Rooster Teeth, which is one of the major, YouTube content producers. She was telling me that the big thing for her clients always is just like, are you consistent? Are you on a predictable schedule that your followers can set their timer to and know that every day, every other day, every week, every month, whatever it's going to be, they know to look for you when you're supposed to post. And if you don't, and they start to lose that consistency, then they lose trust and you don't have anything. So it really sucks because you have to be both patient and keep doing the work even when nobody's watching it. And that really sucks.
Yeah. Well, and I think going along with that, like in the planning stages, you have to probably be very realistic with yourself as far as how much you can put out. Because what was it? Isn't there some stat that like 80% of podcasts stop producing their show after 20 shows or something like that?
Oh, I think it's like 10. Yeah. I mean, I think like most podcasts don't actually, I mean, it's the same for most YouTube channels, right? There's like, you go to some, abandoned channel from 4 years ago where some kid was like, all right, guys, like today's my first day of college. I'm going to vlog every week. We're going to see, and then it's like, all right, week 2. And then it's like, oh man, week 6. I'm sorry. I totally forgot about this. And it's like graduation. So
yeah.
Right. I think, I mean, again, you could translate this into pretty much any activity ever, any career you want to be in. There is no magic shooting star you're going to find on day one. It's like anything else you've chosen to do for work. You have to grind. You just have to do it.
Right. And I mean, being honest with yourself, because if you try and set yourself up and say, okay, I'm going to do 3 podcasts every single week, that is a lot of time, a lot of effort, and it's difficult. And so if you say to yourself, okay, you know what, I'm going to do one every 2 weeks, way more manageable. And you know what? It's easier, I think, to add more shows if you want, rather than be like, or no, it's easier. Yeah, it's easier if you want to add some more rather than be like, oh, dude, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to talk about.
You are reading my mind. When I kicked this off, I had 3 episodes in the can. I launched all 3, 1 week after the other. And then I had nobody lined up for interviews. And so I kind of dropped off.
Yeah.
And so until I got to a place where I could do every 2 weeks consistently and then say, okay, now I need a buffer for every, I need to get back up to every week. That's where I've been, recently. I did the same as you. As soon as I get off this call, I got to go finish editing and then I got to go send out 10 invites because at least one of them will say yes. And then I can sort of bank for the future. But that's the grind and it's hard. It's fun. And if it's creatively engaging, it's worth the effort, but it's hard.
It definitely is. And I'll tell you though, I feel a great sense of happiness though when the show I push upload and it's all done and it's out there in the world. There's this little buzz that I get for the rest of the day where I'm sort of just like, awesome, all right. And then it does sink in rather quickly. It's like, okay, next show, got to do another one. But there is that little honeymoon phase where I'm always kind of like, yeah, that's awesome. I put the effort in and there it is. And it's all virtual, it's not actually there, but it is. I don't know.
Yeah, it's, I don't know. I'd love to hear what you think about the editing process, because that's actually my favorite part of all of this. I mean, I should say it's my second favorite part. My first favorite part is this part, which the interview, the conversation, doing something where it feels really good in the moment usually translates to good content later. But I actually really enjoy going through and, clipping things down. And, when you have those awkward ums and ahs and pauses, like cleaning those out and getting a story together that feels really cohesive really resonates for me. I don't know that you go down the rabbit hole quite as far as I do, but your content is still really good. How much editing do you do with most of your interviews?
This is why I really love sitting down with you, Jason, because we're so similar in so many ways, but we're on opposite sides of the whole think tank in others. Like editing is my worst nightmare. I don't want to do it. If I could literally just press upload, unless I just like to streamline everything. And like you're saying, every once in a while you get a guest that pauses a lot, says a lot. And that if you spend a half an hour going in and getting most of those out, it's going to make the whole episode sound, it's going to sound a little better. The guest is going to sound smarter and less old or something like that, just for instance.
You have somebody in mind with this, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. There's only been maybe 4 or 5 shows where I've had to go through and edit through the whole thing. And if it's really going to make a big difference, great, I'll do it. But for the vast majority of what I do, no, besides throwing the whole thing through 1 or 2 filters, done. That is it. I don't like to, I like to be able to do a show and turn around in 15 minutes. It's on the internet and good to go.
Wow. I admire that. I find sometimes I really enjoy cutting things down because I'm cutting out some of the fat. You know how it is. You do an interview with somebody, and even thinking about this interview and what I've said in the last 40 minutes at this point,
so much has got to get trimmed.
I mean, just it's going to be a 6-minute episode, mostly talking about hair.
We pretty much made a TikTok. That was about it.
It's true. I mean, that's fine with me. No, I just think that part of what I appreciate about the storytelling process at large, not just with video, but with, I mean, you've written your own, Sailing into Oblivion was your novel, your experience of your time on the water. You have to edit, you have to cut. You cannot have everything because there are some things that just don't contribute the way that they did in your head. That's okay. For me, doing the editing on a podcast is taking, let's call it an hour's worth of conversation and just cutting out the 10 or 15 minutes where it didn't quite work. Or maybe somebody stumbled over their words and it took them 3 or 4 times to get it right. Or I felt like I had to summarize what they were saying so often. Maybe I should go back and just recut some of what they were saying and try to solve some of that. So it's not 80% me summarizing their long tangents. Like there's some of that I really enjoy because in some ways it feels like I'm getting to the essence of the conversation in a way I couldn't quite do when we recorded. And I think some people, particularly, I mean, I think most people aren't as confident on mic and on camera as you and I are. So when you get them on camera, they second guess themselves, they get nervous. I've had 2 or 3 guests who in the middle of an answer pause and go, this isn't going very well. And I'm like, no, it's great. God, why did you stop? Yeah. And so for me, it's really about giving some color to the essence of whatever it is the person I'm interviewing was getting to. There's probably even more editing I could do. I tend to try to keep things, the linear conversation, I try to keep that intact. But every now and again, you're just like, oh man, this 8-minute tangent on like different colored Legos. No, we can't keep that. There's no value here to anybody.
Well, and deciding on how much time you want to spend, how much you're going to dedicate to that. Because, obviously you have bigger priorities. You got the family, you got all this other stuff going on.
Yeah.
Is that one of the things where you're sort of just like, okay, well, for each show, I give myself 4 hours and that is my edit time. And if I don't wrap it up in that, well,
yeah, my thing is when everybody's gone to bed, that's when I do my edit. I give myself 2 2-hour windows, one to do the edit, the other to do title and thumbnail and try to get as many short form cuts as I need to do. Sometimes with some of the newer episodes, I now film, I take 5 minutes and I film like a preamble, hey, it's building value with Jason Ellis. Today I'm interviewing Jerome Rand, like that kind of silly stuff. But I really do try to limit the production time to no more than 4 hours, in part because once I launch the episode and then I see the responses, I then go back and give myself permission for like 15 or 20 minutes at a time to try to find more short form content I can spit out into the internet to try to goose the numbers. And some of that is based on the edit. Some of that is based on, some of the short form content is based on what I thought went well in the edit. Some of that is just what an AI spits out at me. I do use an AI tool for that. And then I move on. And it's, until I get a better system where I can really work with somebody else and do a proper edit where I get feedback from a producer, I kind of just have to keep moving. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's like you read my mind because that was the next sort of subject that I wanted to jump into. And I'm amazed that you are splitting 50-50 between editing the content of the show, which I would have thought would have been the big chunk, and the big 3, the thumbnail, the title, and the intro, which I am lacking skills in all 3 of those drastically. But you, my friend, do a phenomenal job with it. And how important are those things?
I mean, first of all, I think you're being really generous when the truth is there's a lot of work I need to do on at least 2 of those 3 things. I think the intro I do okay on.
Be humble. Your intros are magic.
It's not humility. It's candor. The title and thumbnail. So I'll say this. There's an influencer I am deeply indebted to on a number of levels, a guy named Austin Evans, who's based in LA. Austin was an advisor for a startup I was a part of. He's been a good friend and a good coach for me on and off for a number of years. And the one thing that he said to me a couple of years ago when I started to broach this in general was the idea that before you make a video, if you can't see the title and you can't see the thumbnail, you're not there. You haven't done the work.
Interesting.
The reason being, So back in the day, what you subscribed to on YouTube was the most heavy influence of what would be shown to you when you showed up on the homepage. So recommendations would be based primarily on the channels that you subscribe to. That's really no longer the case. Recommendations are based on so many other factors now that your subscribers, and this is on YouTube specifically, of course, let me just be clear about that, that subscribers are now a very small part of what is recommended to an individual user. And in fact, if you look at most content creators on YouTube, it used to be that there was an 80-20 split in a viewer breakdown. 80% of their views were coming from subscribers, 20% were coming from people from like the front page.
Yeah, now suggestions. It's the other way, right?
It's flipped. And in fact, it's probably more like 10% subscribers, 90% other people. And so subscribership matters. It matters for a number of things, not the least of which is your ability to show a brand how much influence you have. But it also matters a lot less, and your ability to have crappy titles or crappy thumbnails, the algorithm is a lot less forgiving of. My problem, and by extension, I think your challenge, is that podcasts are also a kind of strange thing on YouTube. Most YouTube content is between 4 minutes and let's say 15 minutes tops. And you know, we're talking about an hour-long interview. The YouTube is built around the idea that you're churning through videos constantly, right? You're watching, 9 4-minute videos in a given time, not one 35-minute chunk of video from somebody where that's not even the end. So, and YouTube gets more money out of serving you more videos because they can give you more expensive pre-rolls at the beginning of a video rather than, every 6 minutes in a podcast jumping in to try to give you an interstitial that ruins the momentum. All of which to say, it's important to put your content on YouTube because I think eventually the pendulum is going to swing a lot more towards longer form content like this. But the important thing to focus on now more than anything is reading up on all the current trends on how to build a thumbnail, thinking about how you can, as we were joking earlier, be clickbaity with your title. How do you entice people to jump in? Because that's 50% of the work. The other 50% is the edit, is the time of, okay, I'm presenting a smart story. I'm presenting a cohesive video. Is this something of value to somebody? That's still important. But if you don't get them on the front end with the video and the thumbnail, it's not going to help. My thumbnails and my titles, I think, are good. I really wish I could afford to hire somebody who is professional at this, who makes it their thing, because my Photoshop skills are limited. And I'd really love it if somebody could do, testing of different thumbnails and testing different titles and really helping me to articulate that. Because I think there's more work to be done there to fill that top of funnel to get more people into watching the long form video.
Well, and I guess, side question, is it worth it to go back and redo your thumbnails, even if they're on videos that are a year old?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Really?
So, because just because the videos are old particularly if the content is evergreen, there's no reason not to go back and do it, because you might notice a significant spike because now it's being served to people who go, oh, that is interesting. And they're going to click into it. Some of the content I get to watch now, it's a year old, it's 2 years old. Sometimes I've watched videos that are 5 or 10 years old. But a number of influencers I've both spoken to and heard from have said, if you come up with a thumbnail that you think is going to activate something better, why not go back and do it? The worst thing you've done is you've practiced your thumbnail skills. The best possible thing you could do is that you've built another annuity for a video that's now going to inch higher up and produce more money for you.
Ah, right. Well, and would you say that it's that old adage of strike while the iron is hot? If you put out a video that's doing really well, it's sort of like, well, maybe go to the back catalog, do a couple other redos on some thumbnails, because more than likely that's going to be the time that YouTube says, well, let's throw a few of those old ones out. Is that pretty valid?
I think so. I went and redid a couple of thumbnails just because I've gotten into a somewhat consistent template for my thumbnails as of late, and I wanted to go back and get some of them a little bit more consistent of that look. I think it had my numbers are so low on some of these videos, it's hard to tell how much of an impact it really had versus like it just makes me feel better to see it all look consistent. But I do think that there's value in that. And who knows, a year from now, I might go back, I might have a catalog of 70 or 80 videos. I might hire somebody to go and redo all the thumbnails and a lot of the titles and just see what happens.
Right, right. How much,
Yeah.
just off the top of your head, what was somebody like that charge? Any idea?
It really depends. I mean, look, you can go on Fiverr and find people who are inexpensive to go do it for you. A lot of the people that I would be looking at, they probably charge, anywhere from 50 to 100 an hour. Or if you're doing it as a project, it's probably going to run you, thousands of dollars to do that much content and to do that back catalog. It's not a small investment.
Right, right. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. But it is important. That's the takeaway here is that's a pretty key element.
I think it's really important to know that if you're going to go down this road, you can't just rely on being a good video maker. You have to think about it comprehensively, and you have to learn marketing skills. And really what this boils down to is how much can you build a good marketing mechanism that fits this very specific activation. So, can you think in terms of titles and thumbnails? And really go look at your favorite videos. Go look at the ones that you watch. What is it about that thumbnail that attracted you? What is it about that title that enticed you to click? Forget the video itself. Just do that research. Take notes on it. Figure out what it is that resonates for you as a viewer, and then see if you can apply that to your thumbnails and your titles and build a kind of feedback loop that helps improve the quality of your top of funnel click through.
Right, right, right. Well, and also I think knowing that, there's no shame in switching your thumbnail up and redoing. I mean, the Mr. Beast, he's out there. Usually if his video hasn't hit 100 million by like day 2, boom, new thumbnail, new this, new that, new title. And he'll go through many of them.
Those guys, I saw a video recently. I can't remember who produced it, but they will actually generate between 20 to 40 initial thumbnails, and then just on a per video basis. And then they'll start to narrow it down, but they will actually run, when you get large enough on YouTube, you can use their A/B testing tool, although there's other ways to A/B test, but they'll use their A/B testing tool, and they'll run an experiment to see which thumbnail has the best click-through rate after the 20 that they've built. And then they'll pick the one that does the best. And then they'll run another experiment with another 15 variants of that specific thumbnail.
Jeez.
Because maybe articulating his fingers from here to here will improve the click-through rate by 0.01%, which for him is another million views, right?
Yeah. God, that's crazy. I'm like, well, let me see what photo I have that's less than 2 megabytes. And let me open up Microsoft Paint and put a title on. So I'm gonna. That's something I'm definitely gonna work on. How much time do we have left? I don't have my ticker on here.
I could do another 10 minutes. How does that sound?
Okay, perfect. Because really, I think my wrap up on some of this sort of discussion. Because really, I mean, if you're wanting to do this, I think the keys that we've really looked into are that, you've got to be willing to put in the work. You want to put out high quality stuff. There's prioritizing. There's things that you need to make sure you focus on, things like thumbnails and titles and all that sort of stuff. But I think, the root of everything, unless you want this to be a side hustle job and you want it to be something that you actually kind of enjoy doing, I think you want to take a good, long, hard look at what you're passionate about and how you want to convey that to your audience, and what sort of audience, like you said in the beginning, what your audience would actually be looking for. So let's say, in my case, I like to sail. Well, what does the sailing genre audience, what are they eating up right now? And is that something that I think I can produce and all that sort of stuff? So kind of being realistic. And I wrote it down in my notes, that old adage of do what you love and the money will follow. And I think, wouldn't you agree that should be kind of like the start, the base, the soil of everything?
I think, so, the old line from Harry Seldon, who developed the concept of the department store, the customer is always right, is actually not the full saying, which it's the customer is always right in matters of taste. I think to your point.
Know that.
Oh, yeah, yeah. No, it's one of my favorite things whenever anybody's like, customer's always right. I'm like, yeah, about the ability to wear ugly stuff. You can wear that if you want to. That's fine. I think to your point, do what you love and the money will flow. there's a missing part of that. And I agree with you in spirit and in principle, but I do think there's an addition to that adage, which is do what you love that others are willing to pay you for, and you'll never work a day in your life. Because I mean, listen, I love, I love drawing in a sketch pad. I'm not very good at it. Nobody's going to pay me for it. If I keep doing it, maybe eventually they'll pay me for it. But in the end, it's not really something that I necessarily need to monetize, but I'm going to keep doing it because I love it. What we're doing here, you talked about this earlier, has to be that fine balance of creative love and work. And I think that's the middle ground that I would aim for. So do what you love, make sure you're doing it in a way that others are willing to pay for it. And that's the gold mine right there.
And just stick to it, grunt it out, know that it's not literally going to take months, but it's probably going to take years.
If you're very good, maybe it won't take years, but I think about it like exercise. I can't bench, 280 if I didn't start by benching the bar, and you got to work your way up. I think sometimes people get really lucky. They find something that works really well and they skyrocket. But I was speaking to a creator a little while ago who went, a couple of years ago, he went ballistic on followers. It went from, 11,000 to 150,000 in no time. And then over the last 2 years, he's been completely flat on subscribers. In fact, he started to even lose a little bit net subscribership over time. And it burned him out because it stopped being fun. It turned out it wasn't really his passion, and it just turned into work. So, there are people who find that little rocket boost. And if you're in the right place to capture it and do something meaningful with it, this is actually the thing I would turn back to you. You got to have a plan. What would you do if the rocket boost hit you? What if you got that spike? What would you do with it? And how can you use that to further what you want to do a year from now, 5 years from now? Do you have a sense of what your trajectory might look like in the next year?
Well, I think for me, essentially and I know we've said this, or I've said this before, the podcast is really the one that I enjoy the most because it interests me to sit down and chat with people. Now that I can do it virtually, it's opened up the floodgates of so many different people that thankfully, and I still don't know exactly why, but they answer my emails and they're like, yeah, I'll come on your show. That is a blessing for sure. Yeah. So, that would be the main focus. I think if I became a little more competent with some of the video stuff, that would be nice. But I've kind of come up with this idea, and I'm going to run it past you, and we're going to see what you think. So originally, my winter plan was to link up with this non-for-profit, sail down to the South Atlantic Ocean, where I was trying to go the couple of years ago, and do the plastics research and then come back. I get to go on this beautiful voyage. I also get to do some research into this pollution problem they have down there. So, two wins, and that was the game plan. Now, if that does not follow and everything fall into a place, because there's a lot of working things that have to come together, I still want to go out there. But I had this thought the other day, and I was like, well, if I'm able to get Starlink set up, that means I would have the ability to upload daily what's going on. So doing this daily vlog, maybe even do some live streams, definitely do the podcast, because one of the things when you are sailing alone on an ocean, you have a lot of time on your hands. So I could easily allot a good amount of time to doing video creation, uploading on all the stuff, just need the Starlink to be able to do it. But essentially treating it as like, I am going to bring the audience out onto the ocean with me for 5 months. We're going to do this route, this trip. Wow. And let's see what happens, not only visually around me and all the waves and storms and calms and all that good stuff, but also let's see what happens to old J-Rome's brain and how he starts acting weird, because you're going to see the beard grow. You're going to see, all these intimate parts of it. And it's, I call it like the Ocean Truman Show or something like that. Yeah. And, because I think I could handle doing that for 4 or 5 months. I think it would be a welcome distraction out on the ocean. I think it's attainable. Whether or not I would get out there and start going crazy, but that might be really good content. I don't know. What do you think?
I love the idea. I have two thoughts. The first is, if let's take the path that the plastics research doesn't happen.
Yeah.
If you end up going out on your own and do the Starlink version, you should, or perhaps your agent, depending on whose responsibility, and you guys would discuss this, somebody should get you a partnership with at least one organization to help elevate and lift up what you're doing. I think it's really important to not try to do it on your own in terms of just using your own placements. I think being able to say it, make it part of a fundraiser for an organization, team, find the social media manager at NOAA and work with the US government on like bringing attention to, how the oceans are being affected by global warming and what you're seeing on the water as a result of that, and having them elevate and amplify what you're doing. That would be the first thing I would say. So don't solo it, but make sure that you've got other people amplifying it. The other, frankly, and I know this is going to sound a little bit capitalistic, but like, you should find somebody to sponsor the trip with you. Like, part of the work should be like, let's go find even if it's a partial thing, like, let's find some brands that are going to put up some money. And every time you go, you're going to do a live once a week. You're going to be wearing a Coca-Cola t-shirt. You got Under Armour nearby, whatever. Like, I think
Fruit of the loom.
if that's the direction that you're going to go in terms of like, you're going to spend 5 months on the water and you're going to turn it into a content farm, there's got to be brands that would be interested in that. Not only based on your following on YouTube and TikTok, but also you have a podcast. You're going to be producing, I assume, if not daily short form, very regular podcast content. Of course, they'd want to be a part of that. So what I would say is, I again, this comes back to my thing of like, do what you love, but get paid for it. Like, I'm with you on that in spirit. And even if you end up doing the version that's the plastics exploration, like, talk to the nonprofit about how you can help elevate each other and build some lift in everybody's socials, right? Like, thinking about how you can build partnerships for something like this, and then also building some, pitches and sponsorship and just something in that space, even if it's small. Getting yourself so that you can, the next time you want to do it, a year or two after, you can go and say, so-and-so brand sponsored me. I've got these 3 tiers for sponsorship packages. What are you guys interested in? And just start shopping yourself out there. I think that's what I would do.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I've definitely given it a good amount of thought, because any voyage like that, especially, I've already paid half for the new sails.
Sure.
But I've got to come up with the money for that. Starlink with that package to be able to do it anywhere, on the oceans. You're looking at $3,000 just for everything, and then $250 a month and all that sort of stuff. But I think my approach, what I was thinking is, essentially there's some pretty influential business people that I've been able to sort of get to know and mingle over the years. And I think my goal or my game plan was to reach out to that handful of people first, because they've always, said, if there's anything you ever need, let us know. If there's anything we can do to help, because it'd be nice to do unnamed sponsorship, almost like angel investor in the thing.
Sure.
But I do see your point there, where if you have another brand that has its social media stuff, then it does amplify. It's like they bounce off each other, and then boom. So that's definitely something I think about.
I think it's worth considering. I hear you on, you should always strive for a balance between, I don't want to say monetization, but getting yourself funded. You don't want to go backwards in time to when you accidentally spent more money than you earned on a speaking engagement, right?
Yeah.
I mean, 10% rule, right? Everything you do, every time you do one of these big projects, they should be 10% better than the last one. I think getting some underwriting and support, and maybe it's not that they're silent investors, but maybe they're your angel sponsors. And at the end of every video you produce, and at the end of every podcast you do, hey, I just want to take a second and read the names of all these wonderful people who are out here supporting me. If this is interesting to you and you want to support, go to Patreon. This particular tier is set up for you guys who want to help fund this trip directly. And every time I record, I'm going to look at the list and I'm going to see who's on the list, and I'm going to read your names. Maybe it's just that, it's just an acknowledgement. So that way you're not, you're not reducing the value of what you're doing. You're not cheapening it, but you are still making the money you actually need to live. And I think that's an important counterbalance to have.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a fine line, I think, in some ways for sure. But
Yeah.
I see what you're saying. Really, the bare bones here is that if I can do this trip without having to pay, like I always do. I mean, I typically come back from the ocean broke. I don't want to do that again because I'm at an age now that I can't
keep
be
doing
broke. I can't keep doing that. Yeah, I can't spend. I got to start building a nest egg or whatever.
Yeah, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to make money. Like that's the advice I would have. Don't be afraid to make money. Figure out what you're comfortable with. Figure out what other people are willing to pay for. Just even if it's just like you just want to be able to break even, so that the time that you spend on the boat, when you come home, you're not any more in debt than you were when you left. Maybe even you have a little bit more money net in the bank. That's a hugely valuable goal to try to hit for, because then it means that when you do it again, or you do smaller versions of it where you've already figured out like, all right, here's the routine, here's the rhythm, here's where I'm comfortable putting these sponsorships. Then you've already got like a package to go sell and an idea of how you're going to frame it out. And that, that can be lucrative.
True. Yeah. A lot of stuff to process, a lot to think.
Yes,
and, believe it or not, I'm running out of time because essentially by beginning of July, I'm going to be back on Sparrow doing some of the final prep work. And that's essentially the only issue I have is that boatyard, tiny little place, has almost no internet at all. So the goal right now, my short-term goal, you asked me what I see in a year. My short-term goal at this point is to be able to get Starlink so that when I'm in that boatyard, I can still upload stuff daily about, what projects I'm doing. And I think, generally getting the practice in for trying to create a little bit more compelling videos and all that sort of stuff. So
I dig it. Let me know how we can help. I would, I'll say this on camera. Let's talk offline. Let's figure it out.
Let's talk. Yeah, we'll talk behind the curtain.
Behind the curtain. Yeah, I love it.
Well, Jason, this like always is awesome. I think it provides so much great information for me, but also any listeners out there who are sailors that want to start their channels, have a small channel, but want to grow it. So I thank you for your insight and input, man.
I appreciate it. I want to thank you too, because, when I'm thinking about the kinds of people that I want to put out to an audience to emulate their path and their growth and the North Star of being creative without being sellouts, you're the person I think of. It doesn't mean we shouldn't get you more money, but I also do think that you provide a perspective that is truly unique. So thank you. The other thing I was just thinking is we've been watching my background slowly change color because it's sunset here, which is beautiful, but it makes me realize I really can't edit this down. I can't move pieces of this around because you're going to see my background color change. It's going to not be the natural progression from light blue to dark blue. If in the middle of it suddenly cuts and it's like his background was like cerulean. Now it's like nighttime. Like what the hell was that? So I guess this is basically going to be the like unedited. It's going to be fun.
Wow. Welcome to my world. Well, and
it's real scary.
Jason, I think one last tidbit to tack onto this whole thing is just remember, you know what? It's never going to be perfect.
Thanks, Mom. You're right. Okay. I got it.
Oh, man. Well, I almost knocked over everything. Well, thank you. Thanks for having me on your show, and thanks for being on my show.
Anytime, brother. Let's do this again sometime soon.
Sounds good.